I never thought my life would take such a strange turn. Growing up on a quiet ranch, surrounded by endless fields and the gentle neighs of our horses, I always felt like I had a pretty ordinary life. But everything changed the day my mom handed me her old video camera and said, "We need to do something unconventional." Her tone was calm, almost too calm, like she had already made up her mind. I didn't know whether to feel nervous or excited. Our family wasn't exactly wealthy. My dad had left years ago, and my mom had been struggling to keep things running ever since. The ranch was our entire world, but it was falling apart. Cracked fences, leaky roofs, and unpaid bills piling up like storm clouds on the horizon. I could see the worry etched into my mom's face every day. She tried to hide it, but I knew. That's why, when she came to me with her idea, I couldn't bring myself to say no. She didn't give me all the details at first, just said it was a way to help the ranch survive. "People love animals," she told me, her voice filled with an odd mix of desperation and determination. "And our horse, Star, is special. We could do something with him that nobody's ever done before." I didn't understand what she meant. Was she talking about filming tricks? Some sort of online show? The camera felt heavy in my hands, like it carried all the weight of her expectations. I wanted to believe it was harmless, that it would somehow fix everything, but the way she avoided my eyes made my stomach churn. Later that evening, she brought me out to the stable. Star stood there, his dark eyes gleaming under the dim barn light. My mom handed me the camera again and said, "This is how we save our home. Trust me." The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken tension. I hesitated, looking at her, then at Star, and finally back at the camera. What could she possibly have in mind? As the barn doors creaked shut behind us, I realized I wasn't just holding a camera. I was holding the beginning of something I'd never be able to undo. As the barn doors closed, my mind raced with questions. What exactly was my mom planning? Why was she being so secretive about it? I held the camera tightly, its cold plastic pressing against my palms. Star stood calmly in his stall, his chestnut coat shining under the dim light. He was our most prized horse, gentle and intelligent, and I could tell he trusted us completely. That trust made me feel even more uneasy, like whatever was about to happen might shatter something fragile. "Mom, you're scaring me," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "What are we doing with Star? Just tell me." She glanced at me, her expression softening for a moment, but the determination in her eyes didn't fade. "It's not what you're thinking," she said, her voice low but steady. "It's just, people love stories. They love real, raw moments. And we have something special here, something people will connect with. We need to show them what this ranch means to us, what Star means to us." Her words were vague, but they sparked a memory. A few weeks ago, I overheard her on the phone, talking about content and viral potential. At the time, I thought she was just venting to a friend about her struggles. Now, I wasn't so sure. She opened the stall door and gently stroked Star's mane. "You know how much he's helped us," she said, her voice softer now. "He's more than just a horse. He's part of our family. People need to see that." I nodded slowly, but the knots in my stomach tightened. My mom's love for this ranch and Star was real, but so was her desperation. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a line, though I wasn't sure what kind of line it was. She handed me the camera again and began arranging hay bales near Star's stall. "We're just going to tell a story," she said, almost like she was convincing herself as much as she was convincing me. "Something people will feel in their hearts. They'll see the beauty of this place, the bond we have with Star, and maybe they'll want to help us." I stayed silent, watching her work. The air was filled with the faint smell of hay and the steady sound of Star's breathing. It all seemed innocent enough on the surface, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something I couldn't quite name. When she finally turned back to me, her eyes were full of unspoken emotion. "Are you ready?" she asked. I wasn't sure if I was, but I nodded anyway. Whatever this was, it was already in motion, and there was no turning back. The camera felt heavier than ever as I hit the record button, the small red light blinking to life. My mom stood beside Star, brushing his coat with deliberate care, her hands moving in slow, practiced strokes. She began talking, her voice warm and inviting, like she was speaking to an old friend. She talked about the ranch, how it had been in our family for generations, and how Star was more than just a horse. He was a symbol of everything we were trying to hold on to. At first, it seemed harmless. She was telling a heartfelt story, painting a picture of our struggles in a way that anyone could relate to. But then, as she kept speaking, her tone shifted. She started emphasizing how unique Star was, how people didn't truly understand the connection between humans and animals until they saw it firsthand. Her words were carefully chosen, almost rehearsed, and I realized this wasn't just about sharing our story. She was building something, leading up to a moment she hadn't told me about. I couldn't help but glance at Star. He stood there quietly, his eyes following us, with a calmness that made me feel guilty. He had no idea what was happening, no idea that he was at the center of whatever plan my mom had concocted. "Let's show them," she said suddenly, breaking the rhythm of her speech. She turned to me, her eyes alight with determination. "Let's show them how much he trusts us, how much he means to this family." I hesitated. "Show them what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into a small box she'd brought into the barn. She pulled out a handful of carrots and held them out to Star, who eagerly nuzzled her hand and began munching. "It's about trust," she said finally, "about the bond we've built with him. People need to see that. They need to feel it." Her words sounded innocent enough, but the intensity in her voice told a different story. This wasn't just about feeding a horse carrots on camera. There was something deeper, something more calculated. I kept filming, my heart pounding as I tried to piece together what was happening. The shadows in the barn seemed to grow longer, stretching out like the questions in my mind. What was she really trying to show? And why did it feel like we were crossing into dangerous territory? The barn felt eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from Star's steady chewing and the occasional creak of the wooden beams above us. My mom's movements were deliberate as she adjusted the camera angle, her focus sharp and unwavering. She stepped back and looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Keep filming," she said softly, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. I followed her instructions, though my hands were trembling. She walked over to Star, holding out her hand as if she was about to guide him into some sort of routine. The way she interacted with him felt different now, less like the casual, loving gestures I'd grown up seeing, and more like she was staging something. "People need to see the truth," she said, almost to herself. "They need to understand what we've built here, what we're willing to fight for." Her words hung in the air, heavy with an emotion I couldn't quite pin down. She was desperate, yes, but there was something else, a need to prove something, to show the world that our little ranch was more than just a struggling piece of land. Then she did something that made my heart race. She reached for Star's halter and guided him out of the stall, leading him to the open space in the center of the barn. Her movements were calm, but the way she glanced at the camera told me this moment was critical to her plan. "Stay with me, Star," she whispered, her voice soothing yet charged with energy. The bond between them was undeniable, but it also felt like she was putting all her faith in this one moment, this one act. She turned to me, her face illuminated by the dim light. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This is what they'll remember." "What are you talking about, Mom?" I asked, unable to hide the panic in my voice. "What are we even doing here?" Her eyes softened for a brief second, but the determination quickly returned. "Just trust me. Everything depends on this." The tension in the room was unbearable. I could feel my chest tightening as I kept the camera focused on her and Star. I didn't know what was about to happen, but it felt like we were standing on the edge of something irreversible. Star stood in the center of the barn, his ears twitching as if he could sense the tension in the air. My mom stepped back, her eyes flicking between the camera and the horse. Her expression was one I'd never seen before, a mix of hope and fear, like she was holding her breath and waiting for something big to happen. I tightened my grip on the camera, feeling sweat trickle down my back. "Mom," I said cautiously, "this doesn't feel right. Just tell me what's going on. What are we trying to do here?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She held it up for a moment, almost like she was debating whether or not to show me. Then, with a deep breath, she unfolded it and handed it to me. I glanced at the paper, my eyes scanning the handwritten words. It wasn't a plan or a list of instructions. It was a note, almost like a script. It described a scene, one where Star was supposed to do something extraordinary, something that would capture hearts and go viral. "What is this?" I asked, my voice rising. "You wrote a script. Are we staging this whole thing?" "It's not staging," she said quickly, her tone defensive. "It's storytelling. People need something to believe in, something that feels real. We're just giving them that." I stared at her, my chest tightening. "You're asking me to lie," I said, the realization hitting me hard. "This isn't about the ranch or Star. It's about creating some kind of fake moment to get attention. Is that what this is about, Mom? Views? Money?" Her face fell, and for the first time, she looked genuinely hurt. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "If we don't do this, we'll lose everything. The ranch, the horses, everything your dad and I built before he left. I can't let that happen." Before I could respond, Star let out a sudden, loud neigh, his head jerking up. Both of us turned to him, startled. Something had spooked him, though I couldn't see what it was. He backed up a few steps, his hooves scuffing against the barn floor. "Star, it's okay," my mom said softly, moving toward him, but her voice didn't have the usual calming effect. He tossed his head, his eyes wide with alarm. I lowered the camera for a moment, my instincts kicking in. "Mom, he's scared," I said. "We need to stop." "No," she said firmly, her determination resurfacing. "We're so close. Just keep filming." Before I could argue, Star reared up, his front hooves kicking at the air. My heart leapt into my throat as my mom stumbled backward, her eyes wide with shock. The barn suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in as chaos erupted. And then, through the clamor of hooves and my mom's panicked voice, I heard something else, a low, ominous creak coming from the rafters above. It was the kind of sound that made your blood run cold, the kind that told you something was about to go horribly wrong. The sound of the creaking rafters grew louder, like a warning that couldn't be ignored. Star was still rearing, his powerful legs crashing back to the ground as he whinnied in panic. My mom froze, her eyes darting upward as a chill seemed to sweep through the barn. I could see it now, a large wooden beam, cracked and sagging, ready to give way under the weight of years. "Mom, move!" I shouted, my voice breaking through the chaos. She snapped out of her trance just as the beam splintered with a deafening crack. It came crashing down, scattering dust and splinters everywhere. For a moment, everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. I dropped the camera and ran toward her, my heart pounding in my chest. Star bolted toward the open barn doors, his instincts for survival taking over. The beam hit the ground just feet away from where my mom had been standing, the impact sending a cloud of dust into the air. She stumbled but managed to stay on her feet, her face pale and her breathing ragged. "Are you okay?" I asked, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the door. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her voice was shaky. Her eyes stayed locked on the fallen beam, as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. We stepped outside into the cool night air, our breaths coming fast. Star was in the paddock, pacing nervously but unharmed. The barn stood behind us, silent now except for the faint creak of settling wood. "That could have killed us," I said, my voice trembling with both fear and anger. "Was it worth it, Mom? Was any of this worth it?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at the camera still clutched in my hand, its lens dusty but intact. "No," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "You're right. I I lost sight of what really matters." For a moment, I thought that was it, that the chaos was over. But as I turned to check on Star, something caught my eye, something glinting in the fallen beam. I walked closer, my curiosity piqued, and brushed away the dust. Embedded in the wood was a small metal box, rusted and ancient looking. "What is that?" my mom asked, her voice shaking with a mix of exhaustion and wonder. "I don't know," I said, pulling it free. But in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about saving the ranch anymore. Whatever was inside this box could change everything. The metal box felt strangely heavy in my hands, its surface rough with rust and age. My mom and I exchanged a glance, her earlier panic now replaced by cautious curiosity. "Open it," she said, her voice quiet but steady. I hesitated, unsure of what we'd find, but then pried the lid open. Inside was a bundle of papers, yellowed with time and tied together with a brittle piece of twine. My mom leaned closer, her breath catching as she pulled them out carefully. They were handwritten documents, letters, deeds, and what looked like a hand-drawn map. "These are old," she murmured, flipping through them. "Wait, this is a land deed. And this?" Her voice trailed off as she held up the map, her eyes wide. It showed our ranch and the surrounding area, but what stood out was a large X marked just beyond the paddock. "What does it mean?" I asked, my heart racing. She shook her head, her fingers trembling as she traced the map's lines. I think, I think this might be from your great-grandfather," she said. "He always said the ranch had secrets, things he never told anyone. This could be it." We both stared at the papers in silence, the weight of the discovery sinking in. Suddenly, the struggles we'd been facing, the debt, the desperation, seemed smaller. The ranch wasn't just land to be saved. It was part of something much bigger. In the days that followed, we dug deeper, both literally and figuratively. What we found, an old chest buried near the X, contained more documents and items that told the story of our family's history. It was enough to attract local historians and even sponsors who wanted to help preserve the ranch. Looking back, the night in the barn was a turning point. It reminded us of what truly mattered. Not the views, not the money, but the legacy we were part of. The ranch wasn't just a place, it was a story, one we'd nearly forgotten but were finally ready to share.